Hey guys, thanks for watching as always, and thanks for sticking with us. It's been a while since we've done a lure making video, so I figured it'd be about time. Kind of funny thing happened last week. I lost my GoPro. I was gone for about 5 weeks. I was fishing a creek in the south of Dallas, and when I came back, GoPro was no longer. It was a very tough terrain, like you have to do a lot of bushwhacking to actually get through the creek, so I figured my chance of finding it back was very slim since I did a couple of miles. But I went back a couple of days ago, did the full trek back, and stumbled upon my GoPro, so I was very happy to find it back. So we can continue making videos. Now, since we've already made stick baits, jerk baits, I wanted to try something new. Something I've always wanted to try to make at least. Is a diving popper for GT. They use them for tuna as well. Very good lures. They're not very common. There's only a couple of models out on the market at the moment. Most well-known one is probably the Native Works Napalm diving popper. Very good lure. Very high in demand as well. And it's a one-man job for that brand too, so a lot of people are waiting for their lures, but they're very popular. Quite expensive too, but between I think around the $250 mark you'd be looking. And then another good brand, another diving popper from Amagari. They make the Upakari in I think a couple of different sizes, and those are very good lures too. So we want to start making our own. Now they're quite tricky to make because the cool thing about a diving popper is it's got a cupped face. So that it leaves a massive bubble trail like a usual popper does. Big difference is that the face is actually tapered. Actually stands on an angle instead of flat, and that actually gives it the ability to dive down and get a wiggle action underwater as well, kind of like a stick bait. So it really is a combination between a popper and a stick bait, to put it simply. As you can see, I've already cut one out. I've got a brand new bandsaw, which makes life a lot easier, which I'll show you in a bit. But yeah, that's the plan for now. I'm sure that we'll be running into plenty of problems along the way. I'm not even sure if this is actually going to work. I'll probably have to figure out a whole new way of weighting this lure, because you know it's a completely different bait. So might as well just have to figure out what the best way of weighting them is. But it has to sit tail down. We'll just see how we go. So let's have a look and let's get going. Alright guys, so here's my new bandsaw. After I've cut out the wood shape, I make sure I keep a hold of the cutouts, simply because they might come in handy later. After the cutout, we determine the width of the lure. So what I do, I always do this, is just fold a piece of paper in half to make sure that we've got a symmetrical taper on the lure as well. Gives us a bit of guidance on where to make the cut lines. Simply drawing it by hand wouldn't make it perfectly symmetrical, so, and that's always something you're battling. So. Anyway, here I show you why the cutouts actually come in handy. Because the belly is already cut out of shape, it's not very stable on the saw, and so therefore it's handy to use the cutout. You just place it on where it came from, and now it's a lot more steady, a lot easier to cut out. Sometimes even when it's a difficult model to cut, I even use 1 or 2 drops of super glue to secure it in place, so it doesn't move around and my cut lines stay straight. So there's a couple of cuts made. Have to make a couple of adjustments, but it's looking pretty good. Also, in case you're wondering, the back of the bandsaw is fixed, so it can't tip over. It looks a bit suspicious from here, but it's all good. Right, so now we got the taper done. Now we have to determine the cup of the diving popper. So So this is going to be pretty straightforward. We want to determine the surface area first that we're going to use. So I'm just folding some paper around the edges. Gives me a good idea how big of a cup I can start designing. So I got the square in there. I just draw it out with the marker just to make sure that I've got the right dimensions there. It's not exact science, but it comes in handy. As you may be able to tell from my hands, I've been doing a fair bit of painting, so not like I jammed my fingers between the door, but oh. Now since this is a symmetrical cut and we're going to fold that piece of paper in half anyway, you only really have to do one side, but it's not a whole lot of extra effort. You're only going to follow one line anyway. It doesn't really matter. So just a simple fold through the middle. And then you can just cut out the cup lines. You're better off starting off cutting too big rather than too small, because you can always make adjustments later on. So here you see me fit it to the wood, so I'll have to make a couple of adjustments. I honestly have no clue what type of a shape works best. I know the Urpakari from Amagari lures is a little bit more rounded, I believe, or is the Napalm diving popper's got like a pointy end to it, so I kind of want to go in between there. So now we've determined where we can make the carving cuts and what shape the cup has to be, we can start carving. Unfortunately, the bandsaw doesn't solve every problem, but with a good sharp knife and a good quality of wood, it's easy to work with, so that's not too bad. One tip I can give you is before you start carving is to indicate the front as well as the back, the exact dead center point, so that you don't have a bait that's off on one side. Be a lot of time wasted. This time I've used a different type of wood. I usually use Paulownia, but since it was like a bit of a practice and a bit of an experiment at the same time, I didn't want to waste expensive wood. This is not super cheap wood either. This is nice tropical hardwood, but it's a lot cheaper than Paulownia wood at least. So here I've made some indications as to where the wire has got to come out, and then it's time for some sanding. I'm just doing the 80 grit here or 60 grit, one of the two. Both work well. And then we fix her up with 220. You can use 300 depending on the wood grain. If you've got a soft wood, the finer the wood, the grain of the sandpaper, the better. Otherwise, it leaves marks. And here we're getting pretty close. Always check if everything is symmetrical. You might miss some bumps or gaps or whatever. Always double check. Now, the plan of fitting the wire in is a little bit different than we usually do. Usually I have two pieces of wood super glued together into one body shape, but this time we were just going to make a belly slit. It makes it a bit easier because the wood that we use is already pretty thick, and cutting it in half and then fixing it back together is a lot more troublesome, I'd say. So we're just going to make an incision at the front up to where the toe point is, and we're going to do the same on the tail, and after that we'll grind it out until you've got a nice straight line in which the wire can fit.
top of that, usually with stick baits, I like to put the weights not in the belly but more in the middle of the bait, because you have to make them much more unstable. But since this cup face that sits on an angle kind of acts like a diving lip, the bait's already quite unstable, so we have to look more into putting the weights in the belly rather than just the tail. So those are the two cut lines, and I'll just cut the rest out to have a beginning for the handsaw. This took up a little bit more time, but it's a bit inconvenient to do it this way, but it worked. There's special tools for this that make it a lot easier. So here we got the handsaw, and once we've got the slit going, we can actually saw the rest out to the right depth of the lure. This looks a bit odd, but it worked. Now the slit that the saw blade makes is not wide enough for the wire to fit in, but it does get it all the way down to the right depth, so all I have to do is then grind it out with the Dremel. That was probably the biggest obstacle in making this lure. And there you go, pretty straight, looks pretty good. Now, we've already determined the space between the cup and how thick the lip we want to be. We obviously don't want it to be super thin, because then it will break off. So we've given us some space to work with. And I'm just using a grinder tool by Dremel to carve out the shape. Unfortunately, I didn't have a round burr. That would make things a lot easier, because then there wouldn't be any carving grooves in there. It was a bit problematic, but eventually fixed it. This is pretty good work to work with as well. So by grinding it out with the Dremel and then hand sanding it later on, it was actually done a lot quicker than I expected. Again, with this, obviously you want to make sure this cup is symmetrical. If you have a cup that's shallow on one side versus the other, obviously your lure is not going to swim straight. So after all that's done, we're making the wire here. Don't see me actually fixing the wire parts together, which is what we do for the internal wiring. So it just doesn't just bend out, but that fits perfectly in there, which is pretty neat. It's looking good. All now that's left is to put the weights in the tail, fix her up. Perfect.
Alright guys, so we've actually fixed in some weights in the back, as well as fixed the wiring that we put in through the slit, as you've seen in the video. We fixed it in with sand dust and super glue. Go through a fair bit of super glue, but at least it's fixed in well. I always like to go for super glue over epoxy, because super glue actually seeps into the wood grain, and just from past experience, I've tried to break open a faulty stick bait to get the weights out, and I actually broke the wood instead of the section where two pieces of wood meet. So I'm very confident that super glue actually holds up very well. Only tricky bit was to make a fixture in the lip, obviously, because it's very thin and you have to shape it the right way, but after a bit of sanding, that was all nice and smooth. And we've made sure that the cup is very symmetrical as well, so that it doesn't swim off to one side, essentially. So next step is Not necessary, but as you know from me, I love doing some face carving on the lure to make it real. I ran into a bit of a problem simply because of the shape of the face. It's kind of hard to draw a mouth from up to down because of the outstanding lip. So with a bit of inspiration from one of my old Megabass lure, it's called the Megabass Anthrax. It's a baitfish that sits upside down, so belly up, with the idea that a dying baitfish sits belly up on the water surface. So we'll make him upside down. We'll do the hand carving now and see how we go. We'll do the foiling after that too. So cheers. Now, as I always say, guys, definitely not a job that's necessary to do. As a matter of fact, I actually think the next one will be without a face carving, simply because these are actually quite a lot of fun to make, and I wouldn't mind getting a couple more of them, so I might keep them a bit more simple for myself. This is probably the more time consuming of the job, and definitely not necessary, so oh well, it looks good at least. Put some time in. I will say, making your own face carving and doing all that work, you can say that you have a unique bait. There's no one that's going to replicate that. Everyone's got their own style at least, and it is not some dodgy lure manufacturer all of a sudden wants to copy over your lure. If you've got your own wooden carved bait, that's unique, and that will always be very valuable. So anyway, just kind of done here with the carving. It's all sanding from here, so we used a 300 grit to do some sanding to make sure that the edges are smooth, as per usual. That's starting to look pretty good. Some of those cuts become really thin, and it's kind of hard to get the sandpaper in there, but oh well, it works. Alright, so we just sanded all the cutting points for the face carving. We also sprayed it with some enamel, just random clear coat spray that you can buy at any do-it-yourself store, nothing special. Let it harden out a little bit, and then I sanded it. We'll put on a second coat of that so it's nice and smooth. Double check if everything is smoothed out, double sand everything a little bit just to make sure, and then we'll put on the first spray coat. And then after that we can actually start foiling, which is when it starts to look really good, hopefully. So, alright, we'll get onto that right now. Alright guys, so we finished up spraying the enamel, did 2 coats of that, sanded everything off, looked pretty smooth, and then we proceeded to spray paint it black. Reason I go for black is because it covers up all the dark spots. It's obviously the darkest color you can have, and on top of that it really shows if there's any parts that are not smooth, because the light really bounces off it. So it gives me a good opportunity to have a look at where I need to sand. I'll give it another black spray paint coat after that, and then we can start the foiling. So we'll do that right now. Alright, so we sanded some of the non-even spots, got I think pretty much all of it out, and we'll respray paint it with black again. If I was going to spray paint a lighter color over this, or airbrush it, obviously this side would come out a lot darker than the belly, So we want to make sure that everything is even. So the best color to use as an undercoat is black. If you use a white undercolor, there might be some darker spot that shine through underneath that, and so you still haven't really created a matte finish. So yeah, we'll spray paint as black again, and then after that we'll start the foiling.
Alright guys, now you've probably seen this one before. Tedious foiling job. If you're wondering why I'm using an Uber cart right there, I like using cardboard with straight edges. It doesn't damage the foil in the process. It's better than plastic or anything like that. So yeah, just use cardboard. It's probably the easiest. And just in case you're wondering, this Uber card is already expired, so if you want the snicker code of it, I've got bad news for you. Either way, this works great. Yep, it does take some time, but it makes the lure look really good. You do have to take it into account sometimes, especially with smaller lures. Foil can really be influencing buoyancy and swimming action, so I guess it's just a trial and error, obviously, but usually with bigger lures it's no problem. Here I'm doing a cross cut over the lateral line. That's my favorite type of pattern, and yeah, makes it look realistic, especially when you do a good spray paint over the top of it. Looks really nice. Take your time and make sure that the surface that you're using is super smooth. It's super easy to damage foil, and once you do, you can start from scratch again, because it means that you have to start all over again. Damaged foil does not look good on a lure at all. So here I'm measuring out the shape of the foil that I have to cut. Obviously I'm not going to just stick it on straight, so we'll have to have a look at where it fits best. If you do commit to foiling, do take your time. You do not want to mess this up. I've done it plenty of times and it's very frustrating, because it just costs you like up to an hour if you just make the slightest mistake. So, but it happens to the best of us, I guess. So we have got two different pieces, one for each side obviously, both the same shape. Just got to reshape it a little bit, make it fit better, fit the roundness of the body better. So here is where you want to take your time as well. Stick the tail on first, and then that allows you to move it around a little bit to which angle the foil goes, which direction it goes essentially. Make sure that it ends on the gill plate and not on the back of its head, obviously. Then yeah, foil job is all messed up. So here you can see it's right aligned with the body, and we can slowly start putting the foil on. Make sure that you always keep the foil straight when you put it on. Otherwise you get wrinkles, and once they're in there, you're not going to get them out of there. As much of a pain as it is quite rewarding once it comes out good. So. Oh, and if you have any questions what type of a foil I use, you can go to any kind of like craft store where you can buy your foil tapes. Usually they're a fair bit more expensive. I literally bought some silver tape from Home Depot. It's called Shur tape, spelled S-H-U-R. It's only $3 a roll, and it's done the job for me perfectly. So it's got a very thin sticky layer on it, so it doesn't have a whole lot of memory if you dent it, and yep, does very well on the lures themselves. Usually those craft stores know that they can charge top dollar for people who are looking specifically for that, but Home Depot is a fair bit cheaper, so where you can save up. Now obviously it's time to do the other side. One thing I always double check on is the height at which I put the other foil so that they are symmetrical on the back. They align. It's just the same thing over again, obviously. So, pretty straightforward. We foiled the face on this one as well without scales, without any scale carving, so it's just a normal piece of foil that we'll be sticking on, rubbing into the scale and the gill pattern, sorry. And that would be it. Trim off the tail, because those bumps, they're going to stick out in the epoxy. It doesn't look good. You have to trim that up properly. Make sure everything is smooth. So here we just go for the straight face foiling. I like to go piece by piece because there's a lot of different shapes. I can't just do them all on one piece, so I like to go either if the face is suited enough for it, then I can do 2 pieces of tape. Otherwise sometimes I need 3. This time I'm doing 2 because they're pretty basic, not too small. Just make sure that you really fix it into the gill pattern. Comes out nice and smooth. And then cut the rest off.
Alright guys, so we're a couple of steps ahead now. We've put on the foil, as you saw in the previous shot. Put on the foil on the face, where it's carved out in the lines, which was really neat. And then we put some paint on, and because I kind of went fast after this, it's a very good chance of slightly damaging the foil, and then your whole work is ruined. So I immediately always want to put an epoxy coat over it. We'll put the eyes on, and then the epoxy coat over it, and we painted the cup red, which is kind of typical for a popper, I guess. Looks pretty good. And the first epoxy coat is on too, so I'm very pleased with the result. It looks pretty good. Now we will obviously do another epoxy coat because it needs to withstand a fair bit. Also, what this allows to do is, because we got some lines of foil here that we sprayed over with a silver metallic paint. You can still see those lines. Now, because we've already put a coat of epoxy over it, we can actually sand those lines away slightly and then spray paint over with the metallic coat again, and then another coat of epoxy, so that the transition is super smooth and you can't really see it, which is pretty neat. We'll be using some glitter paint too, because I've got some leftover glitter paint, of which the cans don't work anymore, but I guess I can just do some random glitter drops on that. It'll be hopefully look pretty cool. Not too many, because it'll take away from the foiling job, but yeah, a couple of extra touches, but we'll see how we go. Alright guys, so as I said before, we've actually finished up with doing another silver spray paint over the belly, or the back, depending on how you look at it. Looks really smooth now. You can't really see the section lines from the foil, which is good. We added some glitter paint in the mouth, and as well as on the back or the belly, whatever, the darker part. Looks pretty neat, I think, so we'll just get ready for another epoxy coat, and then she should all be finished up. One tricky thing with cup lures, like poppers, well, just poppers really, is with the epoxy sitting in the cup of the mouth, which means you have to rotate it a fair bit or hang it on a certain angle. So I think what we'll do is we will hang it face down and then we'll actually switch positions. So we'll hang it face down first and then hold it up straight. If you have a rotator, then it'd be a lot easier, obviously. But I guess that's the way that we'll have to do it right now. So fingers crossed it works out. Let's see how she comes out. Alright guys, so second epoxy coat is on. I went a bit wild with the glitter on the back, but it looks alright. All we have to do right now is test it in the pool. We did have a little bit of a test before we put any paint and epoxy on, just to see if it swam, because otherwise it'd be a big waste of time, obviously. And it did swim very good. The only thing is, 2 epoxy coats and paint and foil make a lot of difference. So still got my fingers crossed that it's swimming good, but let's have a look. Alright guys, so I was very pleased with the swimming action. Swims quite good, leaves a nice little bubble trail. Didn't leave as big of a bubble trail as I hoped it did, but that's probably because the epoxy took up some space within the cup. Something I'll have to take into account next time I make one, but hey, lesson learned. As you can see, it sits tail down, it's beautiful, just how I want it, and it comes up with the face up, so that's perfect. Awesome. Does make a blooping sound as well when you pull it under, which is pretty cool. This thing will catch some fish. Well, thanks for watching guys, stick with us, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe, it'd be awesome, appreciate it. Have a good one, cheers.